Police officer points gun at Judge Judy. Her response changes everything. Narrated by Judge Judy Shandlin, 83 years old. I have been sitting on the bench for 43 years, and I have seen just about everything a courtroom can throw at you. I have watched defendants lie through their teeth. I have seen lawyers try every trick in the book, and I have dealt with people who thought they could outsmart the system. But in all my decades wearing this robe, I never had a police officer pull a loaded gun on me in my own courtroom until that cold November morning in 2024, when Officer Marcus Webb walked through my courtroom doors and made a decision that would destroy his entire life in less than 60 seconds. You think you have heard crazy courtroom stories before. You have not heard anything like this. If you believe that nobody is above the law, not even a cop, then hit that subscribe button right now, because what I am about to tell you went so viral that it was covered in 89 countries and sparked a federal investigation that took down an entire police department. This is not just a story about one bad officer. This is a story about what happens when someone with a badge believes they are untouchable, and what happens when they finally meet someone who refuses to be intimidated. Let me take you back to how this whole thing started, because it did not begin in my courtroom. It began 6 months earlier in a quiet neighborhood on the south side of town, where a 58-year-old woman named Patricia Coleman was living her life and minding her own business until the day Officer Marcus Webb decided to ruin it. Patricia Coleman was not the kind of person you would expect to end up in a courtroom battle with a police officer. She was a retired postal worker who had spent 32 years delivering mail in rain, snow, heat, and cold without missing a single day of work. She lived alone in a small house that her late husband Charles had bought for her 40 years ago before he died of a heart attack when he was only 52 years old. Patricia never remarried. She spent her days volunteering at the local library, teaching kids how to read, and taking care of her garden where she grew tomatoes and peppers that she would give away to her neighbors for free. She was the kind of woman who remembered everyone's birthday, who brought soup to people when they were sick, and who never asked for anything in return. Her neighbors loved her. The kids in the neighborhood called her Miss Patty, and they would run up to her porch after school to show her their report cards and tell her about their day. She was the glue that held that community together, and everyone knew it. On May 3rd, 2024, Patricia was driving home from the grocery store at about 2:30 in the afternoon. She had just bought ingredients to make her famous peach cobbler for the church bake sale that weekend. She was driving her 2015 Honda Accord, the same car she had been driving for almost 10 years, and she was going exactly 28 miles per hour in a 30-mile-per-hour zone, because Patricia always drove a little under the speed limit just to be safe. She came to a stop sign at the corner of Maple Street and Riverside Drive, and she did what she always did. She came to a complete stop, looked both ways, counted to 3 in her head like her husband had taught her all those years ago, and then she proceeded through the intersection. There were no other cars around. The street was empty. It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon in a quiet neighborhood. But about half a block behind her, Officer Marcus Webb was sitting in his patrol car watching her. Marcus Webb was 37 years old, and he had been a police officer for 14 years. He worked for the South District Police Department, and he had a reputation among the other officers as someone who liked to write tickets. Not because he cared about traffic safety, but because he had a quota to meet, and he knew that traffic tickets were an easy way to boost his numbers and make himself look productive to his supervisors. Officer Webb watched Patricia go through that stop sign, and even though she had come to a complete stop, he decided in that moment that he was going to pull her over anyway. He turned on his lights, and he followed her for 3 blocks before she even noticed, because Patricia's hearing was not what it used to be, and she had her radio on listening to gospel music. When she finally saw the flashing lights in her rearview mirror, her heart dropped into her stomach. Patricia had never been pulled over in her entire life. She had been driving for 42 years, and she had never gotten a single ticket, not even a parking ticket. She carefully pulled over to the side of the road, and she put the car in park, and she turned off the radio, and she folded her hands in her lap, and she waited. Officer Webb got out of his patrol car, and he walked up to her window, and Patricia rolled down the window, and she looked up at him with nervous eyes, and she said, "Good afternoon, officer. Is there a problem?" And Officer Webb looked down at her, and he said, "License and registration." Patricia's hands were shaking as she reached into her purse and pulled out her wallet. She handed him her driver's license and her registration card, and she said, "Officer, can you please tell me what I did wrong? I was not speeding, and I came to a complete stop at that stop sign back there." Officer Webb looked at her license, and he looked at her face, and he said, "Ma'am, you ran a stop sign at Maple and Riverside." And Patricia felt her chest tighten, and she said, "Officer, I did not run that stop sign. I stopped completely, and I looked both ways before I went through." Officer Webb's face did not change. He said, "Ma'am, I watched you roll right through that stop sign without stopping, and I am writing you a ticket for failure to stop at a stop sign." Patricia could not believe what she was hearing. She said, "Officer, please. I have been driving for over 40 years and I have never gotten a ticket. I always stop at stop signs. I promise you I stopped." Officer Webb said, "Ma'am, if you want to argue about it, you can take it up with the judge, but right now I need you to sign this ticket." And he handed her a clipboard with a ticket already written out. Patricia looked at the ticket, and she saw that the fine was $340, and she felt tears coming to her eyes because $340 was a lot of money for a woman living on a fixed income from her postal pension. She said, "Officer, I cannot afford to pay $340 for something I did not do." Officer Webb said, "Then you should have stopped at the stop sign." And Patricia said, "But I did stop." And Officer Webb's voice got harder and he said, "Ma'am, are you calling me a liar?" Patricia froze. She did not know what to say. She was not trying to call him a liar, she was just trying to tell the truth, but she could see in his eyes that he was not interested in the truth. He was interested in writing that ticket. She said quietly, "No, officer, I am not calling you a liar. I am just saying that I know I stopped at that stop sign." Officer Webb said, "Sign the ticket or I will have to arrest you for obstruction." And Patricia's eyes went wide and she said, "Arrest me? For what?" And he said, "For refusing to sign a lawful citation." Patricia was scared now. She had never been in trouble with the law in her entire life, and the thought of being arrested terrified her. So she signed the ticket even though every fiber of her being knew that she had not done anything wrong. Officer Webb took the ticket back and he said, "You have 30 days to pay the fine or appear in court." And then he walked back to his patrol car and drove away, leaving Patricia sitting there on the side of the road with tears running down her face. When Patricia got home, she called her daughter Monica, who lived 2 hours away in the city. Monica was 35 years old and she worked as a paralegal at a law firm, and she had always been the strong one in the family. Patricia told her what happened, and Monica was furious. She said, "Mom, that cop is lying. You always stop at stop signs. I have been in the car with you 1,000 times, and you drive like you are taking a driving test every single day." Patricia said, "I know, baby, but what can I do? He is a police officer and I am just an old woman. Nobody is going to believe me over him." Monica said, "Mom, you are not just an old woman. You are a taxpayer and a citizen, and you have rights, and we are going to fight this." Patricia said, "Monica, I do not have the money to hire a lawyer." And Monica said, "Mom, you do not need a lawyer. You are going to represent yourself, and you are going to tell the judge exactly what happened, and we are going to get proof that you stopped at that sign." Monica drove down that weekend, and she brought her laptop, and she and Patricia spent the entire Saturday afternoon researching how to fight a traffic ticket. They learned about something called discovery, which meant they could request evidence from the police department. They learned that police cars have dash cameras that record everything. They learned that Patricia had the right to see that dash cam footage. So Monica helped Patricia file a formal request for the dash cam footage from Officer Webb's patrol car on the day of the stop. They sent the request to the South District Police Department, and they waited. 2 weeks went by and they did not hear anything. Monica called the police department, and they said they were processing the request, and it would take a few more days. Another week went by and still nothing. Monica called again, and this time they told her that the request had been forwarded to their legal department, and it would take up to 30 days to process. Patricia's court date was coming up fast. It was scheduled for October 15th, 2024, which was only 3 weeks away. Monica kept calling the police department every few days, and every time they had a different excuse for why the footage was not ready yet. Finally, 1 week before the court date, Patricia got a letter in the mail from the South District Police Department. She opened it with shaking hands, and she read the words that made her blood run cold. The letter said, "Dear Ms. Coleman, in response to your request for dash cam footage from May 3, 2024, we regret to inform you that the footage is unavailable due to a technical malfunction with the recording equipment on that date." Patricia called Monica immediately, and Monica said a word that Patricia had never heard her daughter say before. Monica said, "Mom, this is garbage. There is no way that camera just happened to malfunction on the exact day you got pulled over. They are covering for him." Patricia said, "What do I do, Monica?" And Monica said, "Mom, you are going to go to that court date, and you are going to tell the truth, and you are going to make them explain why that footage is not available." But Monica did not stop there. She started doing more research, and she found something interesting. She found out that the South District Police Department had an online portal where citizens could file complaints about officers. So Monica went on that portal, and she searched for complaints about Officer Marcus Webb. What she found made her sick to her stomach. There were 11 complaints filed against Officer Marcus Webb in the past 3 years. Every single complaint was from a person who said Officer Webb had pulled them over and written them a ticket for something they did not do. Every single person had requested dash cam footage. And every single time, the police department had said the footage was unavailable due to technical malfunction. Monica printed out all of the complaints, and she brought them to her mother, and she said, "Mom, this guy is running a scam. He is pulling people over, writing them fake tickets, and then the department is covering for him by saying the cameras do not work." Patricia said, "But why would they do that?" And Monica said, "Because every ticket he writes brings money into the department. It is revenue. They do not care if the tickets are legitimate or not, they just care about the money." Patricia felt a fire building inside her that she had not felt in years. She thought about all the people who had probably just paid those tickets because they were too scared or too tired or too broke to fight back. She thought about how many people Officer Marcus Webb had probably done this to. And she decided right then and there that she was not going to let him get away with it. On October 15th, 2024, Patricia Coleman walked into my courtroom wearing her Sunday best. She had on a navy blue dress that she had worn to her husband's funeral all those years ago. She had her hair done. She had a folder in her hands with all of her documents organized the way Monica had taught her. And she had a look in her eyes that told me this woman was not here to roll over and play dead. I looked at my docket and I saw the case. Case number 2024 TR9847, City versus Patricia Coleman, failure to stop at a stop sign. I looked at Patricia, and I looked at the officer sitting on the other side of the courtroom, and I knew immediately that something about this case was not adding up. Officer Marcus Webb was sitting there in his uniform looking bored. He was scrolling through his phone like he had better things to do. He had probably been to traffic court 100 times before, and he probably thought this was going to be just like all the other times. He would tell his story, the judge would believe him because he was a cop, and Patricia would have to pay the fine. Easy money. But he did not know who he was dealing with. He did not know that Patricia Coleman had spent 6 months preparing for this moment. And he definitely did not know that I do not take kindly to police officers who abuse their power. I called the case and I said, "Ms. Coleman, please step forward." And Patricia stood up and walked to the front, and she stood there with her shoulders back and her head held high, and I could see she was nervous, but she was not backing down. I said, "Ms. Coleman, you are here today because Officer Webb has cited you for failing to stop at a stop sign on May 3rd, 2024. Is that correct?" And Patricia said, "Yes, Your Honor, that is correct. But I did stop at that stop sign, and Officer Webb is not telling the truth." I raised my eyebrows because it is not every day that someone flat out accuses a police officer of lying in my courtroom. I said, "Ms. Coleman, that is a serious accusation. Can you tell me what happened that day?" Patricia took a deep breath and she told me everything. She told me about driving home from the grocery store. She told me about stopping at the stop sign and counting to 3. She told me about Officer Webb pulling her over and accusing her of rolling through the sign. She told me about trying to explain that she had stopped and about him threatening to arrest her if she did not sign the ticket. And then she told me about requesting the dash cam footage and about the police department saying it was unavailable due to technical malfunction. And then she pulled out the folder and she said, "Your Honor, I have here 11 complaints from other citizens who say Officer Webb did the exact same thing to them, and every single time the police department said the dash cam footage was unavailable." The courtroom got very quiet. I looked at Officer Webb and I could see his face had changed. He was not bored anymore. He was paying attention now. I said, "Ms. Coleman, may I see those documents?" And Patricia handed them to my bailiff who brought them to me. I read through the complaints one by one and I saw the pattern clear as day. Different dates, different locations, different people, but the same story every time. Officer Webb pulls someone over. Officer Webb writes a ticket. Person requests dash cam footage. Footage is unavailable. I looked up at Officer Webb and I said, "Officer Webb, can you explain to me why the dash cam footage from Ms. Coleman's traffic stop is unavailable?" And he shifted in his seat and he said, "Your Honor, sometimes the equipment malfunctions. It happens." I said, "It seems to happen a lot with you, Officer Webb. According to these complaints, the dash cam in your patrol car has malfunctioned 12 times in the past 3 years. That seems like more than just bad luck. Would you not agree?" Officer Webb said, "Your Honor, I do not control the equipment. If there is a technical problem, that is not my fault." I said, "Officer Webb, do you have the dash cam footage from May 3rd? And he said, "No, Your Honor, like I said, the equipment malfunctioned." I said, "Did you file a report about the equipment malfunction?" And he hesitated and said, "I do not recall." I said, "You do not recall if you filed a report about your dash cam not working?" And he said, "Your Honor, I respond to dozens of calls every day. I cannot remember every single detail." I leaned forward and I said, "Officer Webb, let me ask you a different question. On May 3rd, 2024, at approximately 2:30 in the afternoon, did you witness Ms. Coleman fail to stop at the stop sign at Maple and Riverside?" He said, "Yes, Your Honor. I saw her roll right through that stop sign without stopping." I said, "You are certain about that?" And he said, "Yes, Your Honor, I am certain." I said, "And you wrote her a ticket for $340? And he said, "Yes, Your Honor." I said, "Ms. Coleman, do you have anything else you would like to present?" And Patricia said, "Yes, Your Honor, I have something else." She reached into her folder and she pulled out a piece of paper and she said, "Your Honor, after I got this ticket, my daughter helped me do some research and we found out that there is a traffic camera at the intersection of Maple and Riverside. It is owned by the city and it records 24 hours a day." My eyebrows went up. I said, "Is that so?" And Patricia said, "Yes, Your Honor, and I filed a request with the city to get the footage from that camera on May 3rd, and they sent it to me last week." Officer Webb's face went pale. I said, "Ms. Coleman, do you have that footage with you?" And she said, "Yes, Your Honor, my daughter put it on a flash drive for me." I said, "Bailiff, please set up the courtroom monitor so we can view this footage." And my bailiff got the equipment ready and Patricia handed him the flash drive. The footage started playing on the screen and everyone in the courtroom watched in complete silence. We saw Patricia's Honda Accord approaching the stop sign. We saw her brake lights come on. We saw her car come to a complete stop. We saw her sit there for a full 3 seconds. We saw her look left, then right, then left again. And then we saw her proceed through the intersection. The timestamp on the footage showed 2:31 p.m. on May 3rd, 2024. The exact time Officer Webb had written on the ticket. I looked at Officer Webb and I said, "Officer Webb, I just watched Ms. Coleman come to a complete stop at that stop sign. Can you explain to me why you told this court that she rolled through without stopping?" Officer Webb's mouth opened, but nothing came out. He looked like a fish gasping for air. Finally, he said, "Your Honor, from my angle it looked like she did not stop." I said, "From your angle? Officer Webb, that footage shows a complete stop that lasted 3 seconds. There is no angle from which that would look like she did not stop. He said, "Your Honor, maybe I made a mistake." I said, "A mistake? Officer Webb, you stood in my courtroom and you told me under oath that you were certain you saw Ms. Coleman run that stop sign. That was not a mistake. That was a lie." The courtroom erupted in whispers. Officer Webb's face turned red and he said, "Your Honor, I think I just misremembered what happened." I said, "You misremembered. Officer Webb, this happened 6 months ago and you have been telling the same story this entire time. You did not misremember anything. You lied about what you saw so you could write a ticket and meet your quota." Officer Webb stood up and his voice got loud and he said, "Your Honor, I do not appreciate being called a liar in front of all these people." I said, "Officer Webb, sit down right now or I will hold you in contempt of court." But he did not sit down. Instead, he took a step forward and he said, "You do not get to talk to me like that. I am a police officer and I deserve respect." I said, "Officer Webb, I am warning you for the last time. Sit down and be quiet." But Officer Webb was not done. He said, "You know what your problem is? You think you are so much better than everyone else just because you wear that robe. But you are just an old woman who does not understand how the real world works." The courtroom went completely silent. My bailiff moved toward Officer Webb, but Webb put his hand up and said, "Do not touch me," and that is when I saw it. His other hand moved to his belt, to his holster, to his gun. My bailiff saw it too, and he said, "Officer, do not do that," but Officer Webb's hand was already on the grip of his weapon. He did not pull it out completely, but he had his hand on it, and everyone in that courtroom could see what he was doing. He was threatening me, in my own courtroom, with a loaded weapon. I looked him straight in the eyes, and I did not blink, and I did not raise my voice. And I said, "Officer Marcus Webb, take your hand off that weapon right now." For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The entire courtroom was frozen in that terrible moment where everyone knew that what happened next could change everything. Officer Webb's hand was still on his gun. His face was twisted with rage. He said, "You are going to dismiss this case right now, or you are going to regret it." I said, "Officer Webb, I am going to say this one more time. Take your hand off that weapon and sit down." He said, "I am not sitting down until you dismiss this case." I looked at my bailiff and I nodded, and my bailiff moved fast. He came around the side and he grabbed Officer Webb's wrist and he pulled his hand away from the gun, and another security officer came from the other side, and they had him restrained before he could even react. Officer Webb was shouting now. He was saying, "Get your hands off me. I am a police officer. You cannot do this to me." But my bailiff had him in handcuffs and was reading him his rights. I said, "Officer Marcus Webb, you are under arrest for threatening a judicial officer, attempted assault with a deadly weapon, and contempt of court." And I looked at Patricia Coleman, who was standing there with tears in her eyes, and I said, "Ms. Coleman, this citation is dismissed. Not only that, but I am ordering the city to reimburse you for any costs you incurred in fighting this ticket, and I am referring this matter to the State Attorney General for investigation into Officer Webb's conduct and the South District Police Department's pattern of destroying evidence." Patricia started crying and she said, "Thank you, Your Honor. Thank you so much." And I said, "Ms. Coleman, you do not need to thank me. You did everything right. You stood up for yourself when most people would have just paid the fine and moved on. You are the reason justice worked today." Officer Webb was still shouting as they led him out of the courtroom. He was saying, "This is not over. You are all going to pay for this. I have friends in high places." But nobody was listening to him anymore. After he was gone, I sat there for a moment and I thought about how close we had come to something terrible happening. If my bailiff had been 1 second slower, if Officer Webb had actually drawn that weapon, people could have been hurt. People could have died. All because one cop thought he was above the law. The story hit the news that same day. By that evening, it was trending on social media. By the next morning, it was national news. By the end of the week, it was international news covered in 89 countries, just like I told you at the beginning. The State Attorney General opened an investigation into the South District Police Department. They subpoenaed all of the dash cam maintenance records, and they found out that the cameras had been working perfectly the entire time. The police department had been lying about the technical malfunctions. They had been deliberately destroying footage to protect Officer Webb and other officers who were writing bogus tickets to generate revenue. The investigation revealed that Officer Marcus Webb had written over 400 tickets in the past 3 years, and more than half of them were for violations that either did not happen or could not be proven because the dash cam footage was always mysteriously unavailable. The city had collected over $180,000 in fines from those tickets. But it got worse. The investigation also revealed that Officer Webb and 3 other officers in his department had been running a quota system where they competed to see who could write the most tickets each month. The officer who wrote the most tickets got a bonus and got first choice on vacation days and overtime shifts. The whole thing was being encouraged by their supervisor, Sergeant Richard Dale, who was getting kickbacks from the revenue. The FBI got involved. They charged Officer Marcus Webb with 14 federal counts, including civil rights violations, fraud, and assault on a judicial officer. They charged Sergeant Dale with conspiracy and corruption. They charged 2 other officers who were part of the quota system. And they charged the police chief, Donald Brunson, with obstruction of justice for ordering the destruction of dash cam footage. The trial lasted 6 weeks. I followed every minute of it. The evidence was overwhelming. They had the traffic camera footage showing that Patricia had stopped. They had the maintenance records proving the dash cams were working. They had testimony from 47 different people who had been given bogus tickets by Officer Webb. They had emails between Sergeant Dale and Officer Webb discussing the quota system. They had the courtroom security video showing Officer Webb reaching for his weapon. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. Officer Marcus Webb was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. Sergeant Richard Dale got 8 years. The other 2 officers got 5 years each. Police Chief Donald Brunson got 3 years and was permanently banned from working in law enforcement. The city of South District had to pay out $2.4 million in refunds and damages to all the people who had been given bogus tickets over the past 3 years. They also had to completely restructure their police department and implement new oversight procedures to make sure this could never happen again. And Patricia Coleman, she became a hero in her community. People started calling her the woman who took down a corrupt police department. She did not want the attention, but she handled it with grace. She kept volunteering at the library and taking care of her garden and being the same kind, strong woman she had always been. But she also started speaking at community meetings and church gatherings about the importance of standing up for yourself even when you are scared. She told people that justice does not happen automatically. It happens because ordinary people decide they are not going to accept being treated unfairly. Monica was so proud of her mother. She told me later that watching her mom stand up in that courtroom was the bravest thing she had ever seen. She said most people would have just paid the $340 and moved on with their life, but her mom refused to let a bully win. I think about that case a lot. I think about how different things could have been if Patricia had not had the courage to fight back. I think about all the people who probably did just pay their tickets because they did not have the energy or the resources or the support system to fight. I think about how many other police departments out there might be doing the same thing. But I also think about the lesson in all of this. The lesson is that the system only works when people use it. Patricia could have given up when the police department said the dash cam footage was unavailable. She could have given up when Officer Webb threatened her in my courtroom. But she did not give up. She kept fighting. And because she kept fighting, an entire corrupt system got exposed and torn down. Here is what I have learned in my 43 years on the bench. Justice is not something that just happens because we have laws and courts and judges. Justice happens because people choose to demand it. People like Patricia Coleman who refuse to be bullied. People like Monica who help their loved ones navigate a complicated system. People like the 47 other victims who came forward to testify, even though it meant reliving their own trauma. Justice is a choice. Every single day, we choose whether to stand up for what is right or to look the other way because it is easier. We choose whether to hold people accountable or to make excuses for them because they have a badge or a title or connections. And here is what I want everyone watching this to understand. You might not ever find yourself in a courtroom facing down a corrupt cop, but you will face moments in your life where you have to decide between doing what is easy and doing what is right. You will encounter people who abuse their power. You will see injustice, and you will have to decide whether to speak up or stay silent. In those moments, I want you to remember Patricia Coleman. Remember that she was a 58-year-old retired postal worker living on a fixed income who was scared and alone and had every reason to just pay that ticket and move on. But she did not. She fought back. She stood up. She demanded justice. And she won. That is the real lesson here. Not the dramatic arrest or the viral video or the satisfying ending where the bad guys go to prison. The lesson is that ordinary people have extraordinary power when they refuse to accept that some people are above the rules. My father was a judge before me, and he used to tell me something that I have never forgotten. He said that the courtroom is the last place in America where everyone is supposed to be truly equal. In the rest of the world, money and power and connections can buy you advantages. But in a courtroom, when you stand before justice, none of that is supposed to matter. It is just you, the law, and the truth. I have spent my entire career trying to live up to that ideal. Trying to make sure that everyone who walks through my courtroom doors gets treated with the same fairness and dignity whether they are rich or poor, powerful or powerless, black or white, young or old. It is not always easy. There is pressure from all sides to make exceptions for certain people. There are subtle and not so subtle hints that some defendants deserve special treatment because of who they are or who they know. But cases like Patricia's remind me why I cannot do that, why I will not do that. Because the moment we start believing that some people are above accountability, the moment we accept that a badge or a title gives someone the right to lie and cheat and threaten, we lose everything that makes justice meaningful. Officer Marcus Webb thought he was special. He thought his badge was a free pass to do whatever he wanted. He thought he could write bogus tickets and threaten citizens, and nobody would ever hold him accountable because he was a cop, and who was going to believe a retired postal worker over a police officer. And for a while, it worked. He got away with it for 3 years. He wrote hundreds of fake tickets. He collected thousands of dollars in fines. He intimidated dozens of people into paying money they did not owe. And his supervisors covered for him because they were making money off his scam. But then he met Patricia Coleman. And Patricia Coleman refused to back down. She refused to pay for something she did not do. She refused to accept that his word was more important than the truth. And because she refused to back down, the whole corrupt system came crashing down. Thank you for watching this story all the way to the end. If you believe that courage and integrity still matter, if you believe that nobody is above the law, then I want you to do 3 things. First, subscribe to this channel so you never miss another story about real justice. Second, leave a comment and tell me about a time when you or someone you know stood up to a bully in power. I want to hear your stories. Third, share this video with someone who needs to hear this message. Share it with someone who is scared to fight back. Share it with someone who thinks the system does not work. Share it with someone who needs to know that one person can make a difference. And if you want to see another story about standing up to corruption, click on the video that is about to pop up on your screen. It is about a billionaire who thought he could buy his way out of justice, and what I did about it will restore your faith in the system. Thank you for being here. Thank you for caring about these stories. And thank you for believing that we can build a world where justice is not just a word, but a reality for everyone. Because that is the world I have spent my whole life fighting for. And as long as there are people like Patricia Coleman out there, I know we are going to get there. The end.